Welcome back to Aviatrix Phase 2 product tutorial. In this part 2, we are going to be covering the hot pants and the bomber jacket. I think this is going to be about a 20-minute video because we don't have any strand-based hair to teach you about. We just have some morphs and some D-force. That being said, let's go ahead and hide the bomber jacket. And I am going to frame select on these bomber hot pants. That way we can rotate around it. Again, I'm always assuming that there are a number of beginners watching, so I'm going to cover things like I just covered right there, just little tidbits of information that the video is not really about, but you can pick up how to use the interface and various other things. At any rate, there they are. These are the bomber hot pants. They're leather. You can see from these portholes that, and if you know the pearl waist hot pants, you can see that they were derived from those. Essentially, I got rid of the pearl waist. Then I did some mesh work to clean things up on the bottom, and this is what you have. Let's go to NVIDIA iRay first. I want you to see the leather material. This leather texture is not, by the way, a tweak of Daz's defaults. This is something that I made in Photoshop, so that you can see that it's identical to the leather jacket. They match. I will be adding textures to both of these items, and that will be available as a product update, a free update to those people who already own the product or who belong to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Cosam3D. You'll be basically I'm going to whatever tier Aviatrix Phase 2 is on, which I believe is around the world, will also be what those textures are available on. Okay, having said that, let me not get too far off the subject here. We'll go to texture shaded so that things will move along. And I'm going to cover, first of all, the morphs. Okay, hot pants all snugger. Not Control C, Control Z. And we have our crotch morphs, which are, self-explanatory. This Bonds one just makes a little bit of room here. Depends on your character, depends on if you're using a genital attachment, which one it is, how you have that shaped, etc., etc. Waist snugness. Okay, so we can just do the waist. Also the thighs. Here we can adjust that independently of each other. Okay, hot pants thickness. Push modifier saved as a morph. Typical for my products, as some of you will know. It's just a handy dandy tool that will help you easily get rid of any poke through issues you may encounter on your character in your pose. All right, just gives you a handy tool, kind of a magic bullet to get rid of a lot of that so that you don't have to worry about poke through being a problem. Great, now that we have covered the morphs, I'm going to cover D-force on this. And as I develop products, if you've been following along my more recent videos, you know that I develop a product with D-force in mind. And in my opinion, D-force and morphs go hand in hand. Some of the morphs are just corrective type morphs, like the thickness morphs that I always include. Those are simply corrective morphs, and those do not apply to any D-force considerations. Crotch is another one. That's just a style morph for you to use however you see fit. But a lot of morphs that I develop are developed hand in hand with D-force, and I will tell you why that is. This is a perfect example. If we look at this, we have a pretty good fit, but it doesn't really look quite right because the butt crack here, although it bows in a little too far. If we go up here to the front, we can see that this is a straight line. It doesn't bow in at all, and it needs to bow in just a little bit, but not all the way. That is a realistic fit, okay? If it does what I just said it should do. Now here's the thing about using morphs to do that. You could spend weeks and weeks as a content developer trying to come up with a set of morphs that will make available to you a perfect fit with every pose, with every character, with every shape and size that you can imagine. Remember, as content developers, we have to try to think of what everybody is going to do in just about every circumstance. And as far as I'm concerned, using morphs for those items, for example, is a fool's errand. You'll just never be able to do it. It won't look right. And why would you? Why would you do that when you can simply do this? So here we go. That deforced surface, those deforced surfaces are simply, they're just snugging the pants up, and now we have a realistic fit. You can see that this bows in a little bit, but not all the way. We can see that this bows in a little bit, but not too much. All right. And then all we have to do is we take our waist snugness and we dial that up just a little bit. There it is. Got it. And then probably our thighs too. I can see here that we have a little bit more room than we actually want. So I'm going to go with the thigh left snugness. I'm going to dial that up. Same thing with the right. We're going to dial that up. And now we have a pretty snug fit. Now sometimes when you are dealing with snugness morphs, you may find that in a given situation you end up dialing them in a little bit further than you wanted to, but for some reason, whatever that reason might be, in your given circumstance, you can't dial it back because it'll create a different problem that you were trying to get rid of in the first place. Here's another circumstance in which hot pants thickness comes in very handy. You can just dial it up a little bit, right? So although we didn't have that circumstance in this example, different characters have different waist and hip sizes and stuff. You may run into that. You can also use the thickness morph to deal with it, and now we have brought this out and it doesn't look paper thin anymore on our character, right? So this is some of the, right here, this looks like it might be, I might just be able to dial that out, and I do have it twice as high as the other side there. I wasn't really paying attention to the number. And we'll just dial that out. Okay. You can also, and this is another thing to look at, if you have a situation where maybe it doesn't look as smooth as you want to go over to your parameters. You want to start looking at things like your mesh resolution, which I have this dialed all the way up. It loads that way by default, okay, because it's not a real high density mesh. So we can afford to do that. You also want to look at your mesh smoothing, okay, and you can dial that up. One thing you want to do is make sure that your collision iterations stay ahead of it by, even if it's just one click. It just seems to work out better that way. All right, so there we are. I could futz with that and tweak it and get everything absolutely perfect, and it wouldn't take very long to do. I just wanted you to see that those options are available to you, and that is the hot pants. It's just that simple. All right, so let me hide those, bring in the bomber jacket, and I've had to go through and try to make this video a couple of times over some sound issues. So let me see, I have some morphs dialed in there. Let's go to edit figure, restore figure shape. Should get rid of our morphs. It did. There we go. And I'm going to see if I had any simulation dialed in on this. We're going to clear the selected object, and it looks like there was no deforce simulation dialed in. Okay, this bomber jacket took me a very long time to develop. And it's really the centerpiece of Aviatrix Phase 2, in my opinion. Some people might think that not the hot pants, but the cutoffs are, and you're entitled to that opinion. It's really just what you think is the big deal about it. So everybody gets a right to their own opinion about that. In my opinion, it is this. Okay, let me go to iRay, and you can see that this is identical, this leather texture, to the hot pants. I'll bring those back in, by the way, so that we can look at them sort of side by side, and you can see that the textile density is correct, okay, for each. So there you go. And as I said, I'm going to be introducing more textures for these two items. All right, As I said to you in part one, I kind of had to set a couple of goals aside for this simply because I wanted those cutoff shorts from phase one to get updated and included in phase two. Okay, so I forewent a couple of things. All right, so here we go. We have the bomber jacket. You can see that I actually used D-Force integrally in the development process to get the right hang. Okay, I didn't do these folds, in other words, with a mesh editor. I just, because I knew this was for DAZ, I just let D-Force do that work for me. All right, so and it gives you a better look. So that being said, let's go to our simulation here. I'm just using a pose transition time of 1, and I've mentioned this already at least once in this series of videos. When I do these tutorials, I just do it this way because it moves faster. But you'll probably want to up, not the pose transition time, the stabilization time, and possibly also, depending on your circumstance, the pose transition time. It just gives the physics longer to do the right thing, so to speak. Let's go ahead and simulate. And you can see that it falls down very nicely, hangs on the character very nicely. And remember, this is running in iRay preview mode. So one thing I've noticed about 4.14 is that this iRay preview mode takes longer to initialize, or it seems to take longer than 4.12, but once it is initialized, it performs pretty well. So I'll accept that trade-off. Okay, so there it is in iRay after we have run our simulation. Okay, for whatever reason, I've decided, I guess, just kind of in an ad hoc way to talk about D-Force before I talk about morphs on this item. There's no real reason for that. Here are your physics. Bomber jacket product default, that's what it loads with. Okay, we're going to use the silky. I'm going to show you the difference between silky and regular, which won't show up quite as well in a standard A pose, but you still will be able to see the difference. Jump back to texture shaded and simulate. Excuse me. So you can see, particularly on the bottom, you have more action. The folds straighten themselves out more because there's just more of a pliable character to the fabric. Okay, that is just for a couple of things if you just want that look. Also, if in certain kinds of characters, certain kinds of poses, it is actually a better look to go ahead and use this silky than it is to use the product default, which is a much stiffer type of material. Okay, let's go to one last D-Force setting on this. And did I remember to set my... I did not remember to set my timer, so I hope I'm not going over time on this. But it looks like it's moving along. It feels that way, so we'll just go ahead and keep going with it. So here we are with the collar relax. Affects only the collar. Okay, keep that in mind. Make sure we have our jacket selected and we apply that physics, and now we'll run the simulation again. And you can see it just lets the collar fall down flat. I've used this jacket, I mean, in order to give you a sense of how long I've kind of been fooling around with this jacket, I did some Christmas renders with a version of it a year ago. Not just this past Christmas, but the one before that. And what I found was that for a Christmas render, of course, if you want this to be an elf jacket or a Santa jacket, you are going to want to use strand-based hair up here. And in order to successfully use strand-based hair, that collar has to lay down flat for a lot of the reasons that I've already covered with the cutoff shorts, so I won't go into that here. But at any rate, there you go. That is the collar lying flat. And you notice that we had this, or you probably recall that we had the silky setting. Let's go ahead and reapply the product default. Okay. And then we will apply the relaxed collar. and we will see the difference in the way that that operates. And there you go. You can see that we still have the folds, but the collar laid flat. You may want to use that look. I'll go ahead and cancel this. We don't really need to play that all the way out. Um, it's really up to you what you want to do. Okay. Now let me go into the morphs, and for that, in order to give a clearer picture, I'm going to clear the D-force simulation from that object, and then we will go into these. We have a breast exposed left and right. Okay. So Control ZZ. And we have a jacket open left and right, and they're subtly different. Okay, they're subtly different. When you have different sized breasts, say fantasy breasts, you'll notice that that it makes a big difference to have those. I don't just develop morphs willy-nilly. These are this way. They look similar in a standard A pose on a standard Genesis 8 character, but believe me, there was a lot of thought and work and development that went behind making those. They're not interchangeable. Let's put it that way. They are not interchangeable. I'm on camera, and I don't like that. Okay, we are going to reset that. There we go. I was still in camera mode, and you'll see why when we go to part 3 and I give you the preview for phase 3. At any rate, there we go, and we have the open left and exposed right. We have the thickness again. That is a magic bullet tool for dealing with poke through. Say if you had larger breasts on this character and you got some poke through around the nipples, jacket thickness will help you get rid of that. All right, waist make room requires a little more explanation. If you are going to use these with a pant like the cutoff threads, or with like some cargo pants or something, so a product you get somewhere else, you want to make sure that the jacket doesn't crash into that garment. I've got it marked here pre-sim. I probably shouldn't have marked it that way because you actually can use it pre or post. It doesn't matter. The cutoff threads, for instance, if I were to have those on here, you'd see there'd be maybe a tiny bit of poke through, okay? And, let's say you had that wild and woolly look and you would get a little bit of poke through. It's real easy just to go ahead and dial this out just a bit, and boom, it's gone. See? It will be gone. So that's the reason for that morph. All right, waist pull back left and right. They're pretty similar. You probably want to use these before the sim. Reason being, you can see that they kind of have a tight crease, especially this left one. And what they're for, I developed them for poses where the character has her hand on her hip. All right. And they also are very, very handy for some post-sim correction, depending on the kind of pant, if any, you have on your character. So those each serve a kind of a double purpose. So I will just go ahead and, let me dial in one of them. Let's dial in this left one. And maybe we'll go ahead and dial in jacket open left. Okay. And let's go ahead and just run the simulation. You can imagine a pose maybe where the character is holding her jacket open, maybe to show that she's not armed. Okay, so we'll just hit simulate and you'll see how that works. Okay, you see how it hangs looser and further back on the back. We don't have a hand on the hip and we don't have a hand holding the jacket open, so that's different. And I think I still have that collar on that. Let's do the product default physics. Do I have it selected? Yes. Let's go ahead and run that one more time. Excuse me. So now we have the stiffer collar. Okay. And like I said, you can imagine that this is your character showing that she's not armed. She's not carrying a gun on her waist there or something like that. So that's what that would be handy for. All right. I think that about covers it for the bomber jacket. I'm not sure if there's anything else that really needs to be talked about here as far as that goes. Let me go ahead and clear. Oops, I didn't want to simulate. I wanted to clear that. Let's just go ahead and clear all simulation data in the scene because we're done with all of the products now. So there we are. You have the bomber jackets. For Genesis 8 female, I will be converting this for Genesis 8 male as well. It's kind of a product that I make. I don't think I've ever made any clothing products for any Genesis male figure. And this will be the first time that that happens. And of course, I'm going to have to do some mesh work to lose this. There's no room in the breasts for a Genesis 8 male. Okay, so I'm not going to have that. And so it's going to require a little bit of mesh work. And I will at some point come out with that, and it'll be an add-on for this product. Okay, there is the end of part 2. That is the Aviatrix Phase 2 hot pants and bomber jacket. All right. Now, and that is everything you're going to need to know if you plan on purchasing the product here very soon, or if you already have. That's pretty much everything you're going to get out of this video series. If you want to stay tuned, I'm going to go ahead and go into, and I'll just probably make it part of this video because there's not a whole lot to say about it, but I will give you now the sneak preview for, back out here, for Phase 3, which is this critter. That is a Catalina PBY, World War II model naval aircraft. It was a flying boat. This is the product, the object, the asset that just kind of makes all of this come together and make sense. Okay, it's a civilianized version. This is not a military outfitted version. What I did was because I'm not somebody who's like into airplanes and stuff. All right. But I've always thought that this aircraft was it was a classic. It was developed in the late 30s, first developed in the late 30s, and it was used during World War II as search and rescue, also as a sub hunter, also as a reconnaissance aircraft. All of these things because it could land on water, of course, but it also had a terrific range. It could, for the time, it could stay up for hours and hours and hours. And so it was very handy for all of those purposes. Okay. Now, after the war, they had a number of these in surplus. It was Navy surplus. And there were people in business and people who bought these aircraft, and some people converted them for cargo use, but a few individuals converted them to pleasure craft. And I found that out by just researching this a little bit online, getting some images, and I found some from Life magazine. The first place I ran across this, from Life magazine in 1950, of a businessman who had bought a couple of these, and one of them he had converted into a pleasure craft. Okay, so it had some really neat features. Of course, all of the military stuff was taken off of it, the guns and all of that. And, he had it decked out with a really nice interior, a really cool paint scheme. He had, I believe it was this person who had this front area here completely remolded and made a canopy that opens up like a clamshell, so that there's seating here up front. Passengers can ride up front, and then if it lands on water, a big lake in Okeechobee or in the ocean, down in the Caribbean, something like that, what have you, everybody can take a swim. The people up front can just pop this canopy open and dive straight into the water. It was really cool. So I thought I wanted to have that on this, and I incorporated that. Now, having said that, this project has been on my workbench, so to speak, for a year at least. And I go through and I do a bunch of stuff on it, and then I let it sit for a while. And then I come back and do some more on it, and then I let it sit. And this is a much more complicated project than I anticipated it was going to be, but I absolutely love it. And so I'm taking a great deal of time and care in making this object. It's going to be easily the most careful thing that I've ever done. And that's necessary not only because I think it's a beautiful aircraft, and I've always thought it was a beautiful aircraft. It has that Art Deco look, to it. That's really, it's indicative of the time and the place in which it was designed. There's no mistaking that this is an American aircraft, and it was made during a kind of a golden age of design in this country. It's a very, very pretty aircraft. It really is. There's no denying that. And it also is very innovative. Okay, it had, for instance, this, the landing gear on the side had a complex but durable hydraulic system that would push this out, that would push these wheels out and drop them down at the same time. Also, excuse me, uh, for a water landing, these wingtips are actually floats, and under the wing was an X-frame. And this X-frame was hydraulically operated as well. And what it would do, it would drop down and swing down and create a stable uh, float for the wing tips, okay, to balance the aircraft on a water landing, because as you can see, the wingspan is incredible on this. Um, there are a lot of moving parts, of course. The engines and propellers. Well, the propellers are going to have to be rigged to some degree, all right. And also, we have a lot of moving parts, and this is not even close to complete, folks. This is not even close. Before we even get to the interior, this is not even close. Uh, these nacelles are really just placeholders. The nacelles on a PBY had heat vents going all the way around, metal flaps that would open up. They also had access panels on the side, and I'm going to need to put those in and possibly rig those. They're not going to be difficult to rig, so I probably will rig those. We also have a lot of other moving parts here that you may not even realize at first. I've already mentioned the floats. We also have all of our ailerons. There are 5 of them, one of them vertical on the back. Okay, and in addition to that, we also have the rudder, and that's got to be rigged. I've already mentioned the landing gear on the sides. There's also a piece of landing gear, a nose wheel in front, where the front of this bow, this boat bottom, opens up and the nose wheel drops down. That's going to have to be both meshed and rigged. Okay. Also, I don't have any doors or windows on this yet, but I'm going to have to create some windows and doors. There's going to be a big door right here, all right, for people to get in and out. Also, these blisters are going to swing up independently of each other. They're going to have to. Even the military version had that. And here we have a rear staircase, which is another idea I got from looking at some of these civilianized PBYs. And I think possibly also a couple of the military versions had that, where it's just a staircase. It just comes down and you can climb in and out the back of the aircraft. So there was also in the military versions, and I think in a couple of the civilian versions, they had preserved little windows up here, because this pylon, I'm going to call it they called it a pylon, okay? This structure here that supports the center has space inside of it. There was actually a crew person's seat that they climbed a little ladder and sat in. I don't know if it was a navigator or the flight engineer or somebody, but there was actually a station where in the military people sat up there, and they had little windows to look out of, and they had a job to do. So I may or may not recreate that. I'm not sure how much utility there is in recreating that, because even if I did, there'd only be room for one character up there. And it's a significant amount of work to get that to happen. So I'm still cogitating whether or not I want to do that. I'm not really quite done with the canopy up front. This was by far the most difficult part of the mesh to create. And like I said, I'm not done with it. I'm going to have to add something to it. Pardon the gold here. These shaders and textures are basically on here, most of them, just to differentiate the different portions of the aircraft. These are not finals by any means. But getting back to this, I'm going to have to put a sliding window here on the pilot side, also one on the co-pilot side. So that's really actually not going to be all that tough, but I'm going to have to do it. This clamshell here, this clamshell canopy is going to have to be hinged. It's going to have a seal of some type that goes around it so that it meets up with the fuselage correctly. Not that I expect this thing's real life and it's going to fly, but that's the kind of detail that you can see, and if you don't add it in a model, it's going to stick out. The same thing applies back here, as I mentioned before already, to the blisters. I'm going to have to replace these ends, or add in these ends a kind of a lockdown thing. The blisters had a lot of iterations, okay, on this aircraft. When they first came out, they were flat glass panels, and there was a framework of aircraft aluminum, and it impeded the vision of the lookouts back here. And eventually once they figured out how to do this, and I have a feeling, a sneaking suspicion, that it was the same people who did this for the P-51 Mustang. But once they figured out how to cheaply and easily make this curved plexiglass, which is something we would take for granted nowadays. Back then, they had to actually innovate that. They started putting these in it. And of course, those were very popular on the civilianized pleasure craft versions of these, of which, as I said, there were a few. And you can Google that, Catalina PBY Life Magazine. If you put in that Google search, you'll find those images I was talking about. And that's not the only example, but it's the best photographed example of what I'm talking about. But at any rate, there you go. There's a sneak preview of Aviatrix Phase 3. I don't really have a good prediction for when I'm going to be able to release this. A very ambitious prediction would be this spring, sometime around the equinox, third week of March, end of the third week of March. That would be an Elon Musk type ambitious. I have a lot of irons in the fire, and even if I put everything aside and worked only on this, it would probably be a tight squeeze to get it released by then. So let's say sometime between Easter and Memorial Day. Okay, late spring, mid-spring, I guess is what that would be, is kind of the time frame in which I hope to be able to have this released. It's been a product that's very long in the making. There's only one other 3D model of a PBY that I've found, and I think, and it's one that's a military version, and the artist did a terrific job on it, but it's a military version, and I don't know if it's for Second Life or what it's for, but I don't think it's for DAS. But I didn't want to do a military version. I wanted to do a civilianized pleasure craft version because, in my opinion, not only does that increase the render utility, you can just do cooler things with it. It gives you more options. It also avoids the circumstance where I insult a military veteran by doing something incorrectly. And I don't want to do that because I have a great deal of respect for those men and women who were in World War II. My dad was one of them. He was a paratrooper who fought in France. He fought in the Maritime Alps campaign down in the south, and then right after that was thrown into the Battle of the Bulge and lived all the way through that. So he saw a lot of combat, and he, had a lot of bad memories and bad stuff, and these people sacrificed a lot. So I'm not about to risk insulting any of them in any way, shape, or form. I also am a veteran. I was also a paratrooper, and I also had 3 brothers in the Navy. So I'm not going to. This is already ambitious enough for me. I'm not going to try to do this in a military version for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. There we go. I've been threatening to leave you alone, and now I'm going to do it. This is Causam. You can visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/Causam3D. There are 4 membership levels, tiers. I will put those in the description below, along with links to go directly to those. Also, you'll find a few of my products, not very many, on RenderHub. So you can travel over there. I'm pretty sure I've got Aviatrix Phase 2 up there, as a matter of fact. You can also get Aviatrix Phase 2 on my Patreon site. Another way to get my products and to maybe even get something custom made for yourself, or if you just want to bundle some products together and negotiate a deal, you can contact me directly by email. And that email address is causam63@gmail.com. That's CAUSAM63@gmail.com. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. That is assuming that you are still awake at the end of this video. So we've got a 2-part video, and I think that I've covered a lot of material here. If you have any questions or suggestions or just any comments, please leave them in the comments section below, because I do check on that. And I'd love to interact with my customers and with potential customers, or with just other 3D artists. I like to interact with you folks. So, once again, this is Kazam. Until we see each other again, happy rendering.